I woke up before the alarm. Quiet house. Light spilling through the blinds in those faint golden lines that always reminded me of mornings in the fall, crisp but gentle, like the world trying not to startle you. I reached for my phone, knowing exactly what I wouldn't see. Nothing from him. Again, no happy early birthday text, no missed call, no lazy Facebook post, just silence. I set the phone down, screen still lit. My birthday was a week away, but I'd learned not to expect anything from my brother, not even the bare minimum. I wasn't even angry this time, just familiar with the ache, familiar like a bruise that never fully heals. Walking through the kitchen, I passed the calendar. My birthday circled in red, a small ritual I'd kept since I was 12. Next to it, in bold black marker, Eloise's party planning, confirm cake. That contrast always cut deeper than it should have. How do you remind someone who never cared to remember? I poured my coffee. My daughter, Mia, tiptoed in, sleepy-eyed, handed me a folded piece of paper with glitter glue and hearts. "Early surprise," she whispered, smiling. My husband kissed my temple as he passed, mumbling something about picking up dinner later. They remembered. They always did. But his silence, the absence, felt heavier than the presence of all their love combined. Some silences scream. I found myself staring out the window, coffee cooling in my hand. The bitter taste lingered longer than it should have. I didn't always feel this way. Once, I believed birthdays meant something. That memory felt like another lifetime. I was 9. We had a party. Balloons, cake, everything. I wore this yellow dress with sunflowers that I'd begged for. Dad gave me a book I'd been eyeing for months, wrapped in shiny blue paper. But the day wasn't mine for long. My brother had helped set up the decorations, so everyone praised him. "What a good young man," someone said. My stepmother turned to me, scolding under her breath. "You shouldn't expect people to spoil you just because it's your birthday." Eloise, her daughter, had a birthday just 3 weeks later. Somehow, we celebrated hers with more excitement than mine. Joint party, sure, but always themed to her taste. Princess castles, pink glitter. I never liked princesses. It's not what they forget, I remember thinking, even then. It's what they remember for someone else. Back in the present, my phone buzzed, a forwarded message from my cousin Jenna. "Can't wait for Eloise's big party this weekend. 25 already? Time flies." I blinked, then reread the message. Again. This weekend, my birthday weekend. He didn't just forget. He planned her party. Again. On my weekend, like every year. That hollow ache twisted into something else. Not rage, not yet. Something older, deeper. The kind of pain that learned to sit still. I chuckled dryly. At least I'm consistent, a footnote in my own story. There was no outburst, no dramatic slam of the coffee mug. Just me, standing there, letting it sink in, letting it sit where the warmth should have been. Later, as I checked my email, I noticed something odd. A forwarded thread from the event planning app I used for work, but this one wasn't work-related. Subject: Eloise's guest list. My name wasn't on it, but everyone else was. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely remembered. Even that one cousin who lives in Texas and hasn't shown up to anything in 10 years. Everyone but me. Forgetfulness can be forgiven. This wasn't that. This was exclusion. Planned. Executed. I felt it in my chest, tight, like something trying to crawl out, but I didn't cry. Not then. I just leaned against the kitchen counter, letting my eyes fall to the freezer. Behind the frosted glass was last year's cake. I'd kept it out of spite. No one came, so I never unwrapped it. Never lit the candles. Never took a bite. It sat there like evidence. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, a familiar voice. Melanie, a friend from college. We caught up briefly until she asked, "Hey, by the way, did you ever get that gift I sent last year?" I paused. "Gift?" "Yeah, I gave it to your brother. Said he'd drop it off since I didn't have your new address." My stomach turned. Then another call. Sandra. Same story. And another message from Claire. Same. All of them had sent things. None of them had reached me. The timeline built itself in my mind, 1 year at a time. The cards that never showed. The small gifts I assumed were never sent. The birthday wishes that somehow never came. Not neglect. Sabotage. A quiet erasure, 1 year at a time, dressed up as forgetfulness. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse or scream. I simply whispered into the phone, "Thank you for letting me know." Then I hung up and stood there a while. The freezer hummed beside me. The air felt colder. This wasn't about a cake or a missed text. This was a slow, deliberate wiping away of presence, of importance. But I was done being invisible. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I was hunched over my laptop trying to finish a report for work when a notification popped up on my phone. Family chat, new message. Just those 5 words. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I should have. I didn't open it right away. That hesitation, it said more than anything. But eventually, I tapped. It was a flyer. Eloise's birthday bash. Streamers, gold script, RSVP link at the bottom. Sent by my cousin Madison, who'd probably assumed I was already involved. I wasn't. As I scrolled up through the message thread, it hit me. This wasn't the main planning group. This was a forward, a side conversation, a breadcrumb meant for someone else that accidentally landed at my feet. I tapped back, scrolled through my own messages. There it was. The family Eloise's crew thread, the one I hadn't seen in weeks. No unread messages because I wasn't in it anymore. I tapped open the flyer again. This time, the smiling faces felt sharper, like they were mocking me. My chest tightened. I clicked my nails against the countertop. 1, 2, 3 taps, just to keep myself grounded. That feeling. Humiliation, but wrapped in familiarity. Like watching a party through a window you used to be welcomed through. I was never part of the we they always said, I whispered. Years ago, I helped create that chat. Helped organize a surprise party for our father. Coordinated food, playlists, even a slideshow. That was when family meant something inclusive, real. Now the group had evolved, or maybe devolved. Different name, different purpose. Same bloodline, different loyalty. I clicked on the old group thread name, gone. They'd changed it without saying a word. I was erased like an old contact nobody bothered to remember. Scrolling deeper, I saw their jokes, their back and forths. My brother laughing, dropping heart emojis under Eloise's dress choices. Memes. Planning who brings what. Pictures of the venue. Not once did my name come up. Not one single mention. The ache wasn't new, but the clarity was. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was design. I stood up, poured the rest of my coffee down the drain. It splashed loudly, louder than I expected. That sound felt like something inside me giving way. I leaned against the sink, watching the sky shift darker through the window. The lights outside flicked on. I wasn't ready for night yet. My eyes drifted to my phone again. Last week, I remembered now, my brother had said something like, "I'll send the details soon." Offhand, like a throwaway promise. I opened my email, checked spam, nothing. Then I did something I hadn't done in a while. Scrolled through old texts. There it was, a save the date from him. And then, gone. The message had a deletion tag. He sent it, then erased it. Even my invitation had been retracted. I didn't cry. I just stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. My face blended into the night behind the glass, hollow eyes, straight mouth. You still hoping for a seat at their table? I asked that reflection, and I knew the answer. I didn't even blink. Later, when my son came down for a snack, I asked casually, "Hey, you still in that family chat?" He nodded. "Yeah, kinda." I hesitated. Then, "Can I see it?" He gave me a look, the kind only teenagers can give, halfway between guilt and pity. But he handed it over. I scrolled through on his phone. The header was clear. Family Eloise's crew. The usual suspects. Except I wasn't one of them. One message stood out. My brother had written, "Let's keep this one small, just the usual crew." That word, usual, I handed the phone back. "Thanks, honey." He nodded. I walked down the hallway, into the bathroom, shut the door, and locked it. The mirror didn't say anything back this time, neither did I. I just let myself breathe, slowly, quietly. And then I decided, no more hoping for inclusion. Back in the kitchen, I opened a blank document. I typed something I'd never send, a letter I'd never post. Therapy taught me that. I know I've been the easy one to forget, but I remember every deleted text, every skipped invite, every joke I was never in on. You ghosted me while I was still alive. Then I deleted it. I didn't need to save it. Instead, I opened the side group chat. I left it. No message, no drama, just gone. Not out of sadness, out of choice. They could ghost me all they wanted. I'd already decided. I was writing my own chapter. Saturday mornings had a rhythm. Coffee shop, dark roast, corner table by the window. I'd grab a muffin if they hadn't sold out, sit for 20 minutes with my planner, then head home before the lunch crowd. But that day, I didn't even make it to the counter. The door chimed behind me as I stepped inside. That smell, burnt beans and baked sugar, used to be comforting, familiar. I tugged my sweater tighter around me, brushed past a small group laughing near the window. That's when I heard it. Her laugh. I didn't even need to turn around. That high, breathy chuckle always came with a show. Eloise, sitting just a few feet away, flanked by women from church I hadn't seen since Easter. She hadn't noticed me yet. Remember how Tamsin would cry if someone didn't say happy birthday right at midnight, like it was some federal holiday? Her voice sliced through the room, light and airy. She always made a big deal out of nothing. There were polite chuckles, a few nods. I stood frozen, half shielded by a shelf of mugs. That wasn't just her telling a story, that was her defining me. I didn't move, I didn't say a word. I watched her perform, her perfectly straightened hair, that forced sincerity in her tone. She made sure they understood. I was the sensitive one, the dramatic one, the one who exaggerated. My hand hovered over my phone in my coat pocket. For a second, I thought about recording it, not to share, just to prove to myself it happened. But I didn't. I turned, walked straight out, didn't order coffee, didn't look back. The wind outside cut sharper than I expected. I blinked hard as I walked, but no tears came, just a ringing silence in my ears. Back home, hours passed like syrup. It wasn't until evening that her voice showed up again, this time through my phone. A voice message. I recognized the forced cheer before I even hit play. Hey Tamsin, so, I heard from someone that maybe you felt left out. I'm sorry you feel that way. We all love you, just maybe in different ways, you know? I sat at the kitchen table, letting the message play again and again. Not once did she say she was wrong. Not once did she name what she did. It was all wrapped in politeness, the kind that stings more than any insult. I saved the voicemail, labeled it apology-ish. I couldn't tell you why. Something about hearing it, so polished, so empty, flipped a switch. It wasn't just Eloise, it was the church ladies who nodded, the cousins who never followed up, the friends who forgot but always showed up for her. And me, accepting crumbs like they were a full-course meal, smiling, nodding, telling myself I was above it. But that message, it was a mirror, one they didn't mean to hold up. It cracked something clean open. I found myself remembering something I hadn't thought about in decades. 8 years old. School play. I was a daffodil. No lines. Just stood near the end of the stage, swaying. When the curtain opened, I scanned the crowd. No one. Not my dad, not my stepmom, not even Eloise. Afterward, my teacher smiled and said, "You didn't miss anything important." But I remembered. That moment taught me how to fold myself small, to accept absence as normal, to call it love when it wasn't. And here I was, all these years later, still nodding along. I pulled out my journal, the one I usually used for grocery lists and client notes. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "I am not dramatic. I am not selfish. I am not too much. I am not invisible. Then I started listing memories. Times I was edited out, overlooked, rewritten, not with knives, with shrugs, with silence. I didn't write with anger, just fact, like I was mapping scar tissue. When I reached the bottom of the page, I wrote one last line. I exist. I have always existed. The tears came then. Quiet, not messy, just a release. A few minutes later, another ping, a text from Eloise. Did you listen to my message? I stared at it, typed one reply. I did. Deleted it. Typed another. Not everything needs to be about you. Deleted that too. Third try. Maybe next time, think before you speak. Gone. I didn't send anything. For once, I chose silence. Not the kind they forced on me, the kind I claimed for myself. I came back from errands late that Saturday, the kind of runaround where you're juggling groceries, a dry cleaning slip, and a phone buzzing with half-read emails. The street was quiet, twilight pressing against the windows of the houses. When I turned into my driveway, my stomach tightened. The front door was ajar, not wide, just a soft tilt, enough to show the latch hadn't caught. I stood still for a second, grocery bags cutting into my fingers. Years ago, when the family was still family, that door would be open on purpose. Kids running in, cousins coming over unannounced, my brother asleep on the couch with a football game on. Open meant welcome. But walking inside now, it didn't feel like welcome. It felt like permission taken without asking. Nothing looked touched. No drawers, no obvious signs of entry. But the air was off. Like someone had exhaled and left it hanging. I set the bags on the counter and moved through the house slowly. The curtain shifted a little in the breeze. I closed the door firmly this time, deadbolt clicking under my palm. My laptop was still on the table. My phone buzzed by the sink. I checked my email, my social media. Nothing new. And yet, that sensation of being watched clung to me like a damp shirt. They don't need to break in, I said under my breath, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the window. They just need me to stay silent. The light outside dimmed to a kind of blue-gray. I locked the back door, too. The tension wasn't loud. It was the quiet before a storm, a calm so smooth it almost mocked me. That evening, after I'd put the groceries away and brewed tea I didn't even want, my phone pinged. Kenrick, he ran the nonprofit with Eloise, had sent out a link. Gala video premiere, Eloise's night. I almost didn't click, but habit is hard to kill. It opened on smiling faces, champagne glasses, Eloise in a shimmering dress hugging donors, giving speeches about community and legacy. Polite applause over soft music. Then the thank you segment rolled. Last year, my name had been there. This year, the screen listed name after name, even people who'd only popped in for an hour. My name wasn't anywhere. It hit like a cold hand on the back of my neck. This wasn't forgetting. This was editing. I paused the video, rewound, froze the credits, took a screenshot, then another. I opened my old email drafts, the ones Kenrick had sent me when I was still in. There it was, my name highlighted on the previous year's thank you list. This year's, the public version, blank. The contrast glared back at me like a dare. I sat there long enough for the tea to go cold. By morning, I was on the town's website scrolling through the Community Service Awards donor board. I typed my name, nothing, my maiden name, nothing. I'd given small checks, boxes of food, hours of volunteer work. They'd built their speeches on the backs of people like me, and now they'd stripped my name from the record. For a heartbeat, panic fluttered in my chest. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the site was outdated. But then the panic hardened into something else, stone in the pit of my stomach. I texted Zelma, "Can you come over?" She showed up by afternoon, hair still damp from the shower, carrying her own mug. We sat at the kitchen table as I walked her through the screenshots, the donor list, the gala video, paused on the credits. Her eyes widened. They did this on purpose. I know, I said. We started strategizing. She offered to pay for an investigator. I shook my head. I'll start with public records, old printed programs, library archives, Anything that proves I existed. Zelma reached over, squeezed my hand. Then let's build a trail they can't erase. Her words steadied me. This wasn't anger for its own sake anymore. It was careful, deliberate. Night settled heavier than usual. I showered, put on an old sweatshirt, and sat in the living room with my laptop open, receipts and emails lined up like evidence on a table. That's when the text came. Unknown number. You're stirring trouble they thought was buried. Be careful what you dig up. The room went still, the kind of stillness where you can hear your own pulse. My blood chilled, but a thin smile tugged at my mouth. If they were already warning me, it meant they were scared. I locked the door, closed the curtains, looked at the darkened windows and whispered, I'm not afraid to dig. The library smelled of dust and old paper. I stood there on a Monday morning clutching my folder, the same one I'd filled with scribbled timelines and printouts all weekend. I'd barely slept, but my hands were steady. Mr. Weaver, the librarian, looked up from the counter and squinted when he saw my last name on the request slip. He hesitated a second too long before saying, Follow me. His voice cracked like he knew something. We moved into the back room where bound newsletters and community bulletins lined the shelves. We searched 5 years back. There was my name in 2018. 2019. In 2020, it thinned. By 2021, gone. Not a typo, not a formatting change, just vanished. I asked, Who revises these? He swallowed, eyes darting to the clock. Families sometimes ask, to streamline. He fiddled with the edge of a folder. This one came through email. Your brother's. The words hit like a dull thud in my chest. He looked sorry, but I didn't let him off the hook. Thank you, I said, my voice flat. I left the building with copies under my arm and the taste of metal in my mouth. This wasn't being forgotten. This was being rewritten. On my phone outside, I opened an old fundraiser email. There it was, my name, my EIN, my signature, linked to a community project now rebranded as Eloise's Initiative. The same gala that cut me out. My name on the legal paperwork, theirs on the public banner. I called Jen, a lawyer I'd worked with when my nonprofit was still alive. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what I'd found. She whistled low and said, If they shifted control without consent, that's fraud, Tam. Get everything documented, now. For a moment I stared at the courthouse across the street. I'd always been the one to shrug and keep the peace, but now the peace felt like a debt I hadn't agreed to pay. A part of me was scared. This wasn't just birthday cake or hurt feelings anymore. This was paper trails, signatures, a story that could ruin someone's image if it got out. And for the first time, that fear didn't paralyze me. It powered me. By the time I drove home, dusk had settled like gray smoke. My son was still at his friend's. The house was dark, the air heavy. I sat in the car with the engine off, hands on the wheel. In my head, the old phrases rolled like a tape. Keep the family first. Don't stir things up. It's not worth the fight. My throat tightened. Then I whispered, What if peace costs too much? I went into the garage, found a piece of chalk left from my son's bike games, and walked back out. On the edge of the driveway, right where the gravel met the concrete, I drew a line, one stroke, white and uneven, but mine. I stood there for a long minute, no more crossing into my space. Even if it was only symbolic, it felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. An hour later, there was a knock at the door. Soft, measured. I peeked through the sidelight. Kenrick, alone, holding a bottle of wine like a peace offering. The same brand we used to drink on holidays when I still believed in family rituals. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. Can we talk? He asked. I stayed where I was. Here's fine. He tried on charm first, talked about misunderstandings, how I'd read too much into things. When that slid off me, he changed gears, his eyes narrowing. You really want to break the family over this? I sat down on the entry bench and looked straight at him. You already did. I'm just not pretending anymore. My voice didn't shake. His eyes flickered. For a second, he seemed smaller. He put the bottle on the floor. You think you know everything? You don't. I didn't move. Then I guess it's time I find out. He left, without another word. The door clicked shut. My hand trembled on the knob, but my voice, when I spoke to the empty hallway, was steady. The house was dark, except for a single lamp in the hallway. Midnight, and the walls felt closer than they had in years. I couldn't sleep, not after everything that had surfaced. My hands moved almost without thinking, pulling boxes out from the spare room closet. They smelled of dust and old cedar, pieces of a life I'd packed away when it was easier to pretend I didn't care. Greeting cards, yearbooks, faded snapshots of birthdays, and then a small box labeled Dad's Letters. My fingers hesitated. That box hadn't been opened since I was 16. I sat cross-legged on the carpet and lifted the lid. Inside, a neat stack of envelopes, his handwriting still strong. I opened one addressed to me. The words were simple, unadorned. He saw me as kind, steady, someone he was proud of. I closed my eyes and felt a part of me soften, remembering his voice. Then my hand brushed another envelope, same stack, same writing, but torn, empty. Nothing inside but a flap of paper where something had been. The sight of it landed like a blow. Affirmation next to erasure, proof of love beside evidence of being written out. Morning crept in, pale and thin. I was still in my robe when the doorbell rang. Willa stood on the porch, clutching the strap of her backpack. She looked like she'd walked here on instinct. Uncle said Mom didn't want you to remember what happened. Said you're too sensitive, she blurted before she could stop herself. Her face drained as if she'd said a forbidden thing. I pulled her into a hug. She was trembling. It's okay, I murmured, though my throat burned. It wasn't okay. Her words cracked the wall I'd been holding up. It wasn't just rumors or polite exclusion. They were building a version of events I wasn't allowed to question. And now a child, my niece, had spoken aloud what no adult would dare. It wasn't malice. It was truth spilling out in the only safe direction it could go. In that moment, I felt both wounded and strangely awake. By midday, I was at the small local archive with the torn envelope tucked in a plastic bag. One of Zelma's friends worked there, an older woman with steady hands and an eye for detail. We laid the paper under UV light, coaxing faint ink out of what looked blank. Slowly, a line appeared, my father's handwriting curling out of the dark. You mean more than they'll ever say. The words glowed like something alive. I stared at them, heart hammering. This wasn't an accident. This was proof. The blank wasn't blank at all. It was a silence someone had tried to enforce. I slid the envelope back into its sleeve, feeling a strange mixture of shock and vindication. That one hidden line lit every suspicion I'd carried. I wasn't imagining it. They had taken pieces of me and tried to make them disappear. Back home, my phone lit up with family group texts. Tamsin, you need to calm down. This is family. Let's not fight. You're making this worse. The words scrolled like a script they'd rehearsed together. I didn't reply. Instead, I laid everything out on the dining table. The glowing letter, the screenshots, the donor board photo, Willa's trembling words echoing in my head. I gathered it all into a folder and wrote, "My Truth," across the front. I sat back, staring at the stack. The house was dim again, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, but pressure. This fight isn't loud, I whispered, but it's mine. The sound of my own voice steadied me. It was well after dark when I heard the soft scrape at the door. I walked slowly to the entry. A sealed envelope lay on the mat, no name, just weight. Inside was a black and white print of the torn letter's postscript. My handwriting highlighted, the same line circled, "You mean more than they'll ever say." On the back, in faint pencil, a warning, "Think carefully before revealing everything." My breath caught. They were watching. They knew how close I was. I stood there, envelope trembling in my hand, while the house around me seemed to hold its breath. The quiet wasn't safe anymore. It was the moment before the break. I drove to the old house in the golden light of evening, hands gripping the wheel a little too hard. The long driveway, the cracked walkway, the creak of the gate, it all felt like stepping back into someone else's memory. I stepped inside and the air smelled like mothballs and old wood. Drawers were dusty, shelves sagged. I pulled out photo albums, searching. One frame was empty, a place where my portrait should have been. The mat was yellowed, the frame unused. Someone removed me. And on the family altar wall, ancestors' faces stared back at me. My siblings, my parents, even distant relations. But not me. My absence was loud in that silence. I pressed my palm against the wood. I was never meant to belong here, I whispered. But I won't disappear quietly anymore. Up in the attic, I found what I was looking for. An original family photo from years ago. There I was, center, framed between siblings. When I accessed the online family album now, my silhouette was faded or missing. The contrast was shocking. They had edited me out. Proof at last. The adrenaline surged. I felt both vindicated and hollow. Heart and head collided. The version of me they presented to the world was a lie. That night, I went to the community center for the family tribute night. The hall was lit, people gathering, plaques lined on a table. When they started reading names, mine was called, but not as daughter or sister. I was guest of the family, even friend of the lineage. My name misspelled, the role inverted. I felt heat on my face. Whispers rippled among the crowd. Humiliation washed over me. Then the moment came. Vila was announced to receive the Community Service Award. I held my breath as she walked to the stage. On the plaque was the name of my project, but credited to the Merit Family Foundation. Nothing about me. She smiled, accepted applause, praised the family team, omitted my part entirely. The betrayal tipped into blazing rage. I stood, chairs scraping behind me. All eyes swung toward me. Curiosity, shock, judgment. I didn't speak. I moved toward the stage with the photo I'd brought. As Vela's final words tapered, I slipped the image into a slide projector. It lit up the blank space behind her, the original photo with me in the center. Gasps echoed. Vela froze, stage lights exposing the lie. I didn't yell. The stolen recognition spoke itself. The image demanded attention. Without waiting for her reaction, I walked off the stage. The crowd murmured. I paused at the exit. Behind me, I heard Vela's voice, sharp and wounded. She thinks she deserves more. I turned just enough to murmur into the glare of spotlight. That's exactly what I want. Not your pity, just your acknowledgement. The morning sun felt unusually soft as I laid out my folder on the porch table. I moved photos, letters, legal documents, and screenshots into neat piles. Each piece mattered. I reviewed everything with Jen again over a phone call. She asked the questions I might have missed. I answered calmly. We spoke about liability, truth, what could backfire, and what could finally shift. I closed the call and took a deep breath. I wasn't writing to punish. I was writing to reclaim what had been erased. I opened a blank document and began typing. No thrives, no embellishments, just fact, emotion, memory, and evidence. Outside, neighborhood noises drifted in. A lawnmower, children's laughter, distant engines. The world kept spinning while I prepared to stop hiding. By the time I pressed save, I felt a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in years. I hit publish just after noon. The letter went live on the community board and landed in inboxes via my nonprofit newsletter. At first, crickets, then pings, a flood of responses, curiosities, empathy, exposures. A retired teacher posted, "I always wondered why you disappeared from those fundraisers." Someone else wrote, "This isn't news to some of us. We were told you moved away from family." Others shared stories of being silenced. I watched the words scroll across the screen, heart racing, eyes watering. This was exposure, yes, but also release. The weight I'd carried in silence now had space to breathe in the open. Night came with backlash. My phone lit up with a call from Kenrick, terse, angry. "You're burning bridges." Then Vela's voice message, crying, pleading, "Why couldn't you talk to us first?" Eloise followed with an email. "You're threatening everything we've built." I didn't respond. I let the messages wash over me. Their fear wasn't about me. They were afraid of losing control of their version. I felt calm. The truth didn't need defending. My boundaries were firm now. The next morning, a journalist reached out asking to quote the letter in an article on silenced voices and family secrets. I agreed, but asked them to keep my name anonymous, for now. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a reckoning. Later, Zelma showed up with a simple bouquet of late blooms. She placed them on my kitchen table and said, "What you did. It was brave. Not loud. Brave." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The folder labeled, "My Truth," felt heavier now that it was public. I stood by the window, watching cars pass. I asked myself, now that the truth is out, what do I want? Peace, distance, recognition, or something else? That night, I walked to the mailbox under cloudy sky. Inside was a plain brown envelope with no return address. My fingers trembled as I pulled out a Polaroid, my 9th birthday. I stood between my mother and stepmother, both smiling. On the back, a note. "You forgot this part of the story. So did I. M." I stared, chest tight. I had thought I knew everything. The photo told me I didn't. The photo sat on my kitchen table for hours. I didn't move it, didn't flip it over again. I just looked. The cake with its uneven candles, my pale yellow dress with the strawberry stain near the collar, my smile caught between my mother and Eloise. That smile. It used to come easy. Now it looked like it belonged to someone else entirely. And that note, "You forgot this part of the story. So did I." M. It looped in my head, dragging up questions I thought I'd buried. Micah. It had to be Micah. I called him. Took me 3 tries before he finally picked up. "Hey," I said, trying not to sound like I'd been crying for the last 20 minutes. He was quiet, then said, "I figured you'd call." I told him about the photo, the note, the birthday I could barely remember. He exhaled. "Yeah, you were loved that day. I remember the balloons, the way Uncle David grilled hot dogs like it was a national event. But things got dark after." Nobody really talked about why. When we hung up, I opened my journal and wrote, "Grief isn't always about who you lost. Sometimes it's about what they took with them, memories you didn't even know you had." Then I sat with that thought. Let it sting. Let it sit still. Later that morning, I stepped out with purpose and a sweatshirt zipped high. The park wasn't far, just down 2 blocks and across the street. The same bench from our family picnics was still there, half shaded by a maple tree. I sat down, hands in my lap, heart thudding low like it used to when I was a kid waiting for someone who forgot to show. A couple walked by slowly, older, hand in hand. The man smiled at me, nodded. His wife stopped, looked at me a second too long, then said, "Our daughter hasn't spoken to us in 8 years. We still walk here, though. Feels like she's close somehow." I found myself nodding. "Yeah," I said. "Some things we survive, not fix." They kept walking. I stayed. That afternoon, I drove to my old school. The red brick hadn't changed. I sat on the front steps, the same spot I waited on my 11th birthday when my mom forgot to pick me up. I sat in silence for a while, but I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I just felt here. By the time I got home, the mailbox was full. Grocery flyers, a utility bill, and one envelope, pale blue, addressed by hand. My breath caught. It was Eloise's handwriting. I opened it carefully, like something might break if I rushed. Inside, a letter. No fluff, no apology masks, just her words. "I read your letter. You were right. I did erase you. Not because you weren't worth love, because I didn't know how to share it. I'm sorry." Taped to the bottom was a photo of her son, my half-brother, holding a sign that said, "Happy birthday, Auntie." I didn't sob. I didn't curse. I just let it come. The kind of crying that empties something without explanation. Something had shifted. No, not healed, but shifted. That night, I stood in the hallway and took down every old birthday photo. Not out of anger, just time. I started a new wall. It wasn't about celebration. It was about truth. There was a picture of me planting flowers last spring, my nonprofit's first newspaper feature, me and Zelma laughing outside a fundraiser. I framed 2 letters, mine and Eloise's, side by side, not as trophies, as reminders. The next morning, I met Zelma at the cafe. She walked in carrying a little mason jar with tea leaves inside. "You did it," she said, sliding it across the table. "You broke a silence a lot of us were living in." I held the jar in both hands and said, "Thank you for standing by me." I told her I'd set some new rules. No more calls from Kenrick unless it's respectful. No more texts from Vela at midnight trying to guilt me into silence. Boundaries weren't walls. They were gates. I'd decide when to open them. That evening, I wrote in my journal again. I don't want revenge. I want space. I want breath. I want to choose what stays with me. Then something odd happened. A memory returned. I was 8, maybe younger. Thunder shook the roof during a summer storm. I remember sitting in the hallway, knees pulled to my chest. A warm hand, I don't know whose, landed gently on my shoulder. No words, just presence. I hadn't thought of that in years. I wrote one last line. Healing didn't come in thunder, it came in rain.